How certain is God's existence? That is an important question. Do we have any proofs for God's existence? Could they be scientific proofs? Could they be mathematical proofs? Or could they be philosophical proofs? Any of these, or maybe none of them? Let's start with scientific proofs. How certain are scientific proofs? Most scientific proofs are based on repeated confirmation. Let's take a simple example. The boiling point of water is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That has been confirmed over and over again, but that is in fact an inconclusive way of reasoning, because it calls for more and more confirming cases without any end. This can never add up to complete verification or foolproof. But there is another, more certain way for proofs in science. It is called falsification. Albert Einstein said it well: "No amount of experimentation can ever prove me right. A single experiment can prove me wrong." Sorry, Einstein, even falsification does not come with 100% certainty. Perhaps the temperature of boiling water also depends on other factors, such as altitude and purity. That is basically the end of 100% certainty in science. Bertrand Russell said about science, its method is one which is logically incapable of arriving at a complete and final demonstration. Besides, scientific proofs can never prove that God exists. God is not an empirical, experimental entity. We cannot haul God into the laboratory. God cannot be trapped by some kind of ingenious experiment. If God resides on a level different from scientific issues, not measurable, not quantifiable or touchable, then empirical proofs of the experimental type are obviously out of the question to prove God's existence. But perhaps God is like a scientific hypothesis. God is not a hypothesis in a sense of explanation we adopt until a better one might come along. Hypotheses are always open to refutation, and thus should only be tentatively held. God is not a hypothesis that we hold on to tentatively and provisionally until science advances more. God is an entirely different kind of entity. The question of God's existence should be treated differently from other knowable objects, in that this question regards not which is below us, but that which is above us. The question, does God exist, is not like, do neutrinos exist? So, is there more hope in mathematical proofs? How certain are mathematical proofs? They are only certain when you accept the premises. Euclidean geometry is a good example. The Euclidean system consisted of a collection of undefined terms like point and line and 5 axioms, from which all other properties could be deduced by a formal process of logic. Then and only then is the conclusion 100% certain. In Euclidean geometry, the sum of the 3 angles of a triangle is 180 degrees, but with different axioms, the sum of the 3 angles can be larger or smaller than 180 degrees. In fact, it was non-Euclidean geometry that proved the way for Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity and the current understanding of space-time. Apparently, the premises themselves are not 100% certain. The certainty of the conclusion is based on the certainty of the axioms. That is quite a trivial way of proving things. Yet it offers us more certainty than we can ever reach in science. Einstein said it well: as far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain, and as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality. So, if that is no way for proving God's existence, are there philosophical proofs that can do the job? These proofs are only certain when you accept the premises. So the certainty of the proofs depends entirely on the certainty of the premises. What can give a premise 100% certainty? It's the use of universal principles or statements. They differ from the general statements we find in science. Whereas in general statements such as all honor expands with temperature requires more and more cases for its confirmation, there are also universal principles such as all expansion of ion has a cause. The principle that like causes have like effects come before science can even get started. It's a universal principle or statement that is self-evident, admits no exception, and cannot be denied by anyone in his or her right mind. They are not something confirmed by what we see over and over again, they make us see. Premises like these do not come from science. The truth and certainty of universal statements can be seen without the assistance of science. They are in fact prior to science and make science possible. They are true and certain independently of any particular cases, making them 100% certain. So, let's go for philosophical proofs. Are there sets of premises to prove God's existence? Here they are. Here is one example. Premise 1 states everything that comes into existence requires a cause. Premise 2 states causes can be part of a temporal sequence of causes. Premise 3 states a temporal sequence of causes cannot explain itself, but requires another cause. This calls for a hierarchical sequence of causes. Premise 4 states infinite regress does not explain anything in a hierarchical series of causes. Conclusion: for there to be such a foundational cause is for God to exist. Hence, God exists. Do these premises all qualify? Let's start with the first one. Everything that comes into existence requires a cause. Everything that comes into existence can be radiation, mutation, gravitation, procreation, and the list goes on and on. All these examples require a cause. This is a self-evident universal statement that cannot be denied by anyone in his or right mind. Things that come into existence must have a cause that makes them exist. Put differently, nothing can be the cause of its own existence. Or put simply, children cannot be their own parents. Why not? Well, for something to generate itself or produce itself, it would have to exist before it came into existence, which is illogical and absurd. You do not have to be a Catholic or believer to see and accept this, as it is evident and undeniable for anyone. Let's go for premise number 2. Causes can be part of a temporal sequence of causes. An example, simple, would be the cause of children is their parents, and the cause of those parents is their grandparents, and the cause of those grandparents is their great-grandparents, and so on. In theory, the sequence can even be infinite, going back in time and forward in time without beginning or ending. This means infinite regress is possible in theory, but perhaps not in reality. Besides, if any parent in the sequence dies, that does not affect other members of the series. The point is that in a temporal sequence, a previous parent may long be gone, while the sequence is still intact and keeps going. Premise 3. A temporal sequence of causes requires a hierarchical sequence of causes. Even a temporal chain of causes does not really explain anything all by itself, but it requires a cause as well. True, parents are the cause of their children, but what then explains that parents do have the power to generate children? That calls for a cause at another level, and that cause in turn may call for another cause at an additional level, for example hormones, or even at one more level, for example DNA and genes. They are all in tandem with each other. This makes for a hierarchical sequence of causes. Deleting any causes in this chain of causes makes the series collapse, so it can no longer explain anything in the series. But how far up or down can this sequence go? Infinitely far? Premise 4. Infinite regress does not explain anything in a hierarchical series of causes. Perhaps this is best explained with the following analogy. Infinite regress in a hierarchical sequence of causes would be like an endless series of IOUs, without any real currency to back them. They are just promissory notes without any real value. To get real currency, the chain needs to be connected with something real, for example real money. Infinite regress cannot do this. Is this the same with the entire chain of hierarchical courses? The chain is just floating in the air and keeps doing so until we find an ultimate foundation for it to rest on, or an ultimate beam for it to hang from. None of all the courses in a hierarchical series of courses could hold up anything at all, unless there is something which holds them all up without having to be held up itself. We are ready now for that conclusion. For there to be such a foundational course is for God to exist, hence God exists. Conclusion: there must be a foundational cause which is God, hence God exists. This conclusion could be followed by the phrase quod era demonstrandum, literally what was to be demonstrated, formerly used as the conclusions of mathematical or philosophical proofs. If we accept the axioms or premises, which we must, for they are self-evident to everyone and cannot be denied, we must also accept the conclusion. Only a necessary, self-explanatory, uncaused being can explain why any hierarchical series of courses exists. St. Thomas Aquinas called this foundational course the primary course, making all other courses secondary courses. Some call this the first course, but first might suggest a temporal course which I don't like. God is the primary course. The primary course is the eternal course that has always been in existence. It is not uncaused, not even self-caused, it is pure existence itself. That makes the question who created God or who created the Creator illogical or nonsensical, similar to the question like, what is the square root of a carrot? The primary cause is a necessary being. It does not need a cause to come into existence, for it never came into existence. It has always been. The primary cause is unique in having inherent causal power, whereas secondary causes have only derived causal power. They are derived from the primary cause. Only the primary cause can cause secondary causes to be causes of their own, by being the source of all secondary causes, a power from which all other causes derive their causal powers. Is the primary cause the God of our faith? True, the Bible tells us much more about God than we could ever discover on our own from mere reasoning. But in order to think and talk about this God, we need to know first that God does exist. Otherwise, anything else we claim to know and say about God is of no consequence. In other words, the God of reason is a minimum for the God of faith. Belief in the God of reason, at least belief in God's existence, is a necessary condition for belief in the God of faith. It makes no sense, and is in fact foolish, to believe in someone or something that doesn't exist. So ultimately the God of reason and the God of faith both refer to the same God. Thanks to the premises we discussed here, we can prove that this God does exist. That outcome is quite astounding. You can find more information here, in the book to the left or the book to the right. You can just type in the browser's address bar on top of your browser either the code for the book to the left or the code for the book to the right. You can also scan the code above the two books, and that will give you access to the way you can order one of these books. I hope you enjoyed this video and convinced you that there must be a God.